Hi, my name is Sheila Rai, and I'm part of the curriculum team at American Reading Company, and I'm very excited to show you some of the materials you're going to be using. A little bit about myself. I was a first, second, and third grade teacher in Brooklyn, New York, and I had the chance of using some of the ARC products in my classroom. I then became an ARC coach, and now I'm part of the curriculum team. And I can't wait to show you what you're about to use. So let's jump in to our first box, which says Open Me First. And you've probably already opened it since you got to me, but you started with this welcome letter. And I just want to mention this letter has lots of useful information for you, but it also has a link to a site that will show you all our curriculum in more detail because you only got one part of our curriculum. So I invite you to take a look whenever you have an opportunity. So next, let's pull out this longer paper, which gives you an example of our year-long scope and sequence. And we'll highlight to you some examples of what units of study would look like if you were doing this for the whole year. And each of our 4 units through the year challenges students using rigorous tasks through rigorous standards-based research and authentic writing projects that integrate reading, writing, and content area research. We pair each unit with an authentic multicultural library designed to ensure that every student feels reflected and seen. Because of where you are in the year, we've given you some materials from Unit 2, which align to the standards you're working on right now. So I'm sure you're anxious to dig in to the materials you're actually getting. So let's start with this. In this white box, you will see an URLA. And we're going to get into each of these materials shortly. You'll see a foundational skills toolkit, which we use for small group instruction. And let's put this box down. I do want to mention to you that you want to save these boxes because once you're finished, you're going to want to put the materials back in here to ship back to us. Then we have your framework for the second unit, an informational research lab, a read aloud sample, and a sample of the independent reading books. And in this light box, you'll get baskets so that you can attractively display all the books in your classroom. Here you see I've unpacked the materials, and just a little bit about how I've organized them. I put all the books that say read aloud, and I know they're read aloud with a read aloud sticker, and I've put them all in one basket. And then I've put all the independent books in these 2 baskets. And I tried to organize them attractively so my students would feel enticed to pick up these books. At this point, when you would have started this unit, you would have already finished Unit 1, which is all about engaging readers and writers and really setting up those routines in the classroom. And as first grade teachers, you know you can't start off the year well unless you really set up routines. So that's what we focus on in Unit 1. And then we start Unit 2, which is an informational research lab. So we're going to spend some time digging into this framework because this is what you're going to do for your 3 days during grade level instruction. We'll start by opening up, and in the beginning, you'll find some introduction pages, and they introduce you to a lot of the why of what we're doing. And I do encourage you to, there's some articles here, I do encourage you to look at that when you have some time. But in our introduction, I'm going to take you to page 21, where you'll see our pacing guide. And this lays out what the entire unit is designed to do. And you'll see that while students are, because this is an informational research lab, they're picking an animal. This is the wild and endangered animal unit. So they're picking an animal to research and study, ending up with a book about that animal. And while they're doing that research, you're also working on some focus ELA standards. And like I mentioned before, we chose this unit because the focus standards align with what you're working on right now. For your trial 3 days, we're going to recommend you start with week 1 because, ideally in this unit, students are picking a research topic, which takes a couple of days because you're introducing the research topics to them, and then they're going to pick that animal and research it over the course of 8 to 9 weeks. Since you're not going to have the time to do that, we don't want to disappoint our students. So we recommend you start them in week 1, which is just getting them excited about wild and endangered animals, introducing them to all types of wild and endangered animals, and really just engaging them in the informational lab. So I'm going to start with week 1, day 1, and show you what a day looks like, because this is a framework, so it follows kind of a pattern, and I want to orient you to that pattern. So the first thing I want to point out is every page, every lesson starts with a focus, as well as the standards that align with that focus. And then when you move into the day, you'll see a ticker up top, which tells you the different parts of the day, and what's highlighted in gray is the part the page you're on. And every page has a white section and a gray section. That white section will tell you what to do, and the gray section will give you some tips and tricks and some of the why and a little bit of how, if it isn't completely explained here, that might be particular to your classroom. So as you can see here, we're in the introduction because you're introducing the unit of study, getting kids excited, starting with a morning message. We do provide a sample morning message, but you can, cater that to whatever you would like your students to know for that day. And during the morning message, we're highlighting different foundational skills, like who can come up and find a word that starts with this blend. So after this introduction and morning message, we're going to move to the next portion, which is the interactive read aloud. And for this first day especially, we're really modeling engagement in the unit. We want to get students excited. We want to get them engaged in, we're studying wild endangered animals. We're going to learn so much. Let's look at this book together. And one of the things we want to do is pull out wow facts. What's really striking us as really exciting or interesting about the animals we're about to study. For this first lesson, since I'm trying to engage my students in this unit, I'm going to try to find a book that's really going to pull my students in. And all our books are great, but I think I might select something like this. What if you had animal hair? Because it looks really funny and fun, and I think my students might be pulled into it. But I would encourage you to take a look through all these books, read through them really quickly, and see what's going to pull your students in. While I'm doing this interactive read aloud, you'll see in the next 2 pages, I'll see some charts of things that I might want to do with my students to pull out the vocabulary that they're learning and a glossary, to keep track of the questions they have, because remember, this is a research lab, so we want to encourage their questions, encourage that inquisitive mind of our students so that they're ready to get researching. So once I finish that interactive read aloud and get my students excited about the unit of study, we take them to their independent books in Reader's Workshop. And on this first day, you'll introduce the books. You can use your independent books as well as any books you have in your classroom library as well. The one thing I want to mention to you when you're looking at your independent library is that there are different levels included in here, and you can tell what level you're on by the sticker on the binding. And this is one of the things I loved most about the ARC library when I was in the classroom, that there are books that go all the way down to the kindergarten level and all the way up in this basket to the 2nd grade level. So every student's going to find something that will match that will be readable for them and match their interest as well. So going back to the framework, we're in the Reader's Workshop. So you've introduced the libraries, you're going to set the focus. They're doing exactly what you did in your interactive read aloud. They're pulling out wow facts, what was interesting, what was awesome in the books that they're reading. And then you set them to independently read. I want to mention at this point that this would be our 2nd unit of study. So ideally, you would have those routines in place so students have the stamina to read for at least 15 minutes at a stretch. Now, since this is your first time doing this, you may not have that stamina yet. That's fine. Have your students read for as long as they can maintain engagement. And while they're doing that, your work is to do some formative assessment, walking around, checking in on students, making sure they're finding their wow facts, making sure they're engaged in the unit. And then we move to the accountable talk. And you'll notice that accountable talk is integrated in many portions of the day, because we really want to integrate that social emotional health through peer interaction, making sure every student feels part of the learning community. so that you'll make sure they share their WOW facts with a partner, have a couple of students share out to the group. And I do want to point out here that you'll see an ELL support. We do have some call-outs which look like this, which give you some information of how you can support different students in your classroom. The next portion, I'm looking at the ticker here, is writing. And in writing in first grade, we're going to have a modeling where you're going to model writing about something, and I would keep it integrated with what you're doing the whole day. So I would write about a wild and endangered animal that I read about, and encourage students to write about something that they read about. And I would model thinking as I'm writing and drawing. Give students a chance to check in about what they're going to draw about and write about, and then get them set to independent writing. And again, while they're writing, you're doing that formative assessment, making sure everyone's engaged, checking in on students, and doing some underwriting. And then we end with a share. And this is an opportunity for you to also reinforce anything you noticed as you were doing that formative assessment. Maybe students were forgetting something that you expect from them at this point in the year, like capitalizing the first letter, punctuation, and you might emphasize this at this point. As we move into day 2, what I want to hope you notice is that there's the same structure where we have the standards and focus for the lesson. Then on the top, you'll see a layout of the day, starting with that morning message. Moving on to an interactive read aloud, where you might choose a different read aloud to engage your students. You'll notice now that they're pulling out WOW facts with a rubric, so that they're sharing in complete sentences, providing evidence for what they've learned. They move into that reader's workshop, where they're independently reading. And then they go into writing, where they're writing about what they just learned about. And all the while you're doing some assessment, and students are actively engaging in accountable talk after they do each of the portions of the day. So one thing I want to point out as we go on is that day 3 is when we start officially getting into the unit. The first 2 days we're really engaging them in the unit. So it's totally your call. I know you have our materials for 2 weeks. So you might choose to have students pick one animal. They have the books in the baskets. They can, do a short research project. Or you might choose to stop here and repeat day 2 with another read aloud and have them continue to explore and pull out WOW facts. I think I leave that up to you. If your students are really engaged and want to do it, I think you should probably go for it. Now that we've finished reviewing grade level instruction, you've seen that grade level text is really at the center of every lesson. But I'm sure you're left with a question of, what about the phonics, right? You saw some phonics reinforced in the morning message, you saw some phonics in the writing, but what about the meaty lessons around phonics? Well, we do things a little differently because we know that in each classroom there's a wide array of students. In a first grade classroom, you might have students who are reading close to the 3rd grade level. You might have students who are in the kindergarten levels and all the way in between. And one lesson isn't going to fit the bill for all the students in your classroom. So we suggest that you teach phonics in small groups. And we have toolkits that give you these lessons. Now, we have many toolkits because we know you have many different learners in your classroom who are doing different things. But the sample we've given you is a 2Blue toolkit, which takes students from reading 1-syllable words into reading 2-syllable words. So if you have any students who fit that bill, they might be great students to try out this toolkit with. So when I use this toolkit, what's great about this framework is that it actually sits like this so that I can use it with my students in a small group. And just like every framework you're going to get, it starts with a little bit of the why, of why this matters, what's the research behind it, and all of that information, how to use it. I'm going to take you to lessons 2 and 3, where you'll start with compound words. And the reason I want you to start there is because that's the book we've given you, because every lesson ties into an authentic text, because we all know that it doesn't matter if students can perform a skill in isolation. We really want them to be able to apply it to real text. Let's check out lesson 2. In lesson 2, students are introduced to the concept of compound words. If you feel like your students already know what compound words are, you might skip to lesson 3. But if you're introducing it for the first time, I would do lesson 1. And this is what it would look like to your students, where you have the teacher page and the student-facing page looks at them, so they can practice looking at these words together. Now, if you're skipping to lesson 3, that's when we actually start practicing compound words in authentic text, using sports words, which is really fun, and then reading a sports text and practicing those compound words. So that wraps up what you're going to practice with the toolkit. I just want to mention the when. Usually we'd be doing small group instruction while students are independently reading. And if you have routines in place and the kids are really engaged in the books and reading independently, I would suggest you try this out then. But if not, you'd probably need to find a spot where your students are working independently so you can pull a small group. I would pull no more than 3 students because research really shows that if you do any more than 3 students, the effect size is the same as having a whole group instruction. But try it out, and I hope you have a lot of fun using the toolkit. So next we are going to look at the ERLA. And the ERLA, together with the toolkits, is our proven intervention system. And what the ERLA does is it really personalizes learning for every student. In a full year of ARC Core, teachers use the ERLA to find every student's level, and that level will tell the teacher what each student can do and what they need to learn next. The teacher then pulls out the toolkit to teach the lessons. Teachers often tell us that the ERLA takes the mystery out of teaching reading. For this trial, we don't recommend using the ERLA with your whole class. However, you might want to try picking one student whose reading feels a little bit like a mystery to you. Let's take a quick look in the ERLA to see what you'd be doing with that one student. The beginning pages of the ERLA provide you a bit of that research on the why of what's behind each of the color levels. And there's some pages on how to use the ERLA, which is where we'll stop. Roman numeral pages 8 and 9 tell you how to level a student. And you can simply follow that process to find the level of that student that you select. On your review site, you have access to all the toolkits for all the levels. So once you find a student's level, you might want to try a toolkit lesson with them. You can also see videos of teachers using the ERLA and the toolkits. That wraps up what you're getting and gives you a little insight on what you're doing. I want to give you a gentle reminder to pack up your materials in those boxes when you're finished. And I really want to thank you for being part of this trial. We really hope that you and your students have a lot of fun and are inspired by our unit.